Hey, so you were listening to MiseryTourism.com's Misery Movies podcast, a podcast where we watch an assortment of movies about human suffering, terrible situations, and the sort, and then we have a free-ranging discussion on them. There, how was that for an intro? I actually didn't like trip over myself. What do we
That was
That was
almost
awesome.
professional.
we're who we have some movies to talk about. Okay, anyway, so uh as
Any professional is gone.
gone to fucking hell. All right, so as usual, um I'm Will, and I'm kind of the sort of I don't know. I was gonna say something about being editor in chief of miserytourism.com, but fucking the site is basically dead. What am I fucking like? I'm not even. What am I editing? Fucking anyway. And I'm joined by two of our contributors. Uh, frequent contributor AJ
Yo.
and dude who started talking on the podcast last week and who I have only known for a dozen years or so, Brandon.
A little more than a dozen. Closer to two, actually.
Jesus fucking Christ. Fuck
Yeah, yet
that.
another reminder how old we are.
Oh my god.
You're so old. Both of you are old.
Shut
Yeah.
up. You don't need to rub it in. I know. I know. I mean, anyway, I'm not even not
Oh,
gonna dwell on that. I was
that
depressed
was a
enough as
downer.
it is.
That was a downer,
No.
AJ.
I mean, the depression is kind of one of our motifs, our themes on this site, but you really didn't have to bring up that. Anyway, so we were actually in the midst of a Halloween movie podcast marathon where we watch a whole bunch of different Halloween themed movies that also happen to be misery tourism movies, and then discuss them on the podcast. The idea is that these episodes will all drop around the same time around Halloween. If you're listening to this, and yesterday was Christmas Eve, and I guess today would be Christmas Day then, and the podcast just dropped like December 23rd. I apologize for you. Actually, AJ will have to apologize since that means she took an exceptionally long time to put intro and outro music on the podcast.
I never apologize for anything.
Of course you don't. So today we're going to be discussing Zombeavers, and this movie was actually chosen by Sarah, who, if you've actually listened to any of our other podcasts, which is extremely unlikely, you would know that she's a pretty frequent contributor to Misery Movies podcast. So she proceeded to pick this movie and then get sick on us so that she couldn't join the podcast and discuss it. Um, so that means that I'm going to have to explain what the movie is. Oh, but before that, for any new listeners, which is if we have a listener, you're probably a new listener. I don't know how many times I'm going to do that joke. I'm going to fucking drive that into the earth. I do that every episode. But anyway, um, if you are a new listener, just so you know, the first half of the podcast, we try to keep it spoiler free. We talk about the movie in broad general terms, and we end that first half of the podcast, hopefully the first half an hour of the podcast, with our reviews of the film. And then we'll give the film some kind of rating. Um, and after we've rated the film, the second half of the podcast is when we'll start dealing with spoilers. And we'll give you a little warning in case you want to tune out then or pause the podcast and actually watch the movie. This is a rare instance where a movie that we're reviewing can actually be found right on Netflix. So if you do decide you want to see the movie, you can just turn it on Netflix and watch it. So, but I do want to, I guess someone needs to kind of introduce what the movie is about. As you can probably tell from the title, it is a horror movie about zombies that are also beavers, thus Zombeavers. And there, you might think, oh, well, that's a pretty brief synopsis. Isn't there anything more to the movie than that? There really isn't.
No.
That's it. It's an hour and 20 minutes of zombie beavers. And then it's been a good podcast, folks. Okay. So anyway, normally I would let the person who picked the movie frame the movie and ask the questions, but Sarah kind of left us high and dry here. Although, yeah. So, I guess we might as well start talking about this movie. So, I guess I want to start off by saying, going into this after kind of reading the blurb about it on Wikipedia and sort of, getting the general sense of what it was going to be about, a movie about some teenagers who go off for a weekend in the woods and get attacked by zombie beavers. I have to say, I was I really prepared myself to hate this movie. And it's a good thing I did, because if I hadn't been prepared, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, yeah.
this
I've
was
said
a
this
bad
several
fucking
times.
movie.
I've said this several times. I knew this was going to be a movie I was probably going to have to drink in order to watch, and I wasn't wrong. To have to drink 3 bottles of beer in the hour and 20 minutes that this movie dragged on for wasn't enough, because I still remember the movie.
Brandon, I would shed Brandon, I will shed one tear for you for every beer I've had in my life, because I don't drink, and you can only imagine how much more agonizing this experience must have been for me
Yeah.
than for you.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll shed a tear for every beer that I've drunk in my life, and that means that I'll be sobbing all night.
uh-huh. That's it. Well, you might as well get
Yeah,
started
okay.
now. We're not going to have much else to talk about.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
set the tone. Um, shit. So, Sarah, if you're listening, I guess fuck you.
Oh yeah, yeah. Fuck you.
But how are we have to
Alright.
discuss
Yeah.
this movie, okay? We have to find a
We
way
do.
to talk
We
about
do.
this movie.
I guess I can kind of kick it off a little bit. I've watched a lot of B-rated horror movies in my days. I have no problem with watching movies that are intentionally bad,
Mhm.
that acknowledge the fact that they are intentionally bad.
Yeah. I mean,
I've
that's
watched a lot of shit over the years.
right.
This movie was actually insulting to B movies everywhere. That's how bad this was. This was actually painful to watch.
It was. It was legitimately painful to watch. And I guess we can talk about that idea of an intentionally bad film, because it's an idea that's never sat right with me, and maybe it's just because I'm a snob, but I think that so there's a difference between a film that tries a lot of things and tries to be a good film and
Mhm.
ends up being a bad film, just by happenstance, or because like an Ed Wood kind of deal, right? I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Tim Burton movie about Ed Wood, but apparently Ed Wood was really like, he didn't really set out to make B movies. He just didn't have a good filter, I guess you'd say. Like
Right.
he like loved everything he shot. He was just like in love with, and he didn't take the time to really edit or to really think about like how the audience is perceiving anything. Um, he just he just shot, and he didn't care that the movies were cheap, that they were silly B horror flicks. He just loved it. And the end result were a bunch of really trashy movies that were at least made with
Oh yeah.
enthusiasm. And
Yeah.
then there's a kind of movie that's bad, like cynical bad, like everything Michael Bay has ever done, or Jerry Bruckheimer, where you get the sense that like they dumped a lot of money into this movie and they know they're making shit, but they also know it's shit a lot of people will watch. And you know, that's a little worse in my estimation than the kind of Ed Wood movie that's bad because you're gung ho about it and you're in love with what you're making and you don't realize you're making shit. But there's still a kind of method to that, right? They said,
Yeah.
okay, this movie is being optimized for a very specific audience. That we want to be able to sell this movie overseas. We want to make sure that this movie is going to make sense with minimal subtitles to the growing Chinese population, Chinese movie-going population, right? So we want a lot of big special effects. We want this to be an impressive piece of American movie making that happens to be disposable pap, right? Okay, sure. But there's another type of movie it, that's and my oh, there we go. My camera just froze up for a minute and it freaked me out. That's the intentionally bad movie. And the idea here, I guess, is that, or the movie that's so bad it's good. And I don't buy into the idea that that really exists. I mean, there's a difference between that and an intentional parody or an intentional satire, in that a parody or a satire takes the tropes, takes the worn out, silly, stupid ideas of a genre and then puts a twist on them, does something to them. If it's a smart satire, it takes those tropes and it twists them towards a point. Like, for example, Get Out does this fabulously. And I wish, Sarah, I mean, as long as we had to watch a horror film, I kind of wish it was Get Out. But sure. I mean, in that it takes the tried and true tropes of horror films and twists them into this actually incredibly insightful and still really scary and also somehow hilarious parable about American race relations.
Right.
And it does it brilliantly, right? Or you could maybe, I mean, even if you're not going to aim that high, right? You're not going to aim quite that. You're not going to make, you're not going to make Get Out here. Okay. You could still, and I hate to say this because I never want to say anything nice about Josh Whedon. I despise Josh Whedon. But a few years ago, Josh Whedon made a film called Cabin in the Woods, which was it was a horror parody that in a lot of ways was aiming for I would say roughly the same kind of effect that this movie is aiming for, in that it really wanted to take in that it really wanted to be a send up, a parody of trashy slasher films, trashy monster movies. Those trashy films where a bunch of teenagers go into the woods and get attacked by something, get slaughtered by something, get picked off one by one by a monster or by a serial killer or whatever. And that movie may not have had a great sociological statement to make like Get Out, but what it did do was offer a really smart dissection of horror movie tropes and of the, like, what's really going on under the surface maybe in these films, or the reason we feel drawn to this kind of movie. And it also was actually funny and it twisted
It was. Yeah.
or the you've seen it, Brandon, then.
Oh yeah, I have. Yeah, there was what the important thing that movie had that this one lacked was a self-awareness.
Yeah.
They actually understood what they were doing with Cabin in the Woods. There was that intentional aspect to it, where they were taking everything that they were approaching and stood what they were doing. They weren't just repeating the same pattern, hoping for the same result, or just taking the same thing, throwing it in a blender, regurgitating it, on the floor. They were actually trying to make something with it. This is not that.
Right.
This
Exactly.
is very much not that.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said they were taking the pattern or the layout, like the foundation of one of these movies, the structure of one of these films. And then it was using that. It was, first of all, revealing that structure for what it was, and then building something kind of innovative and different on that structure. But you're right, this movie doesn't do that. And that's the problem, I think, with these quote unquote parody films, these horror parody films that, like Zombeavers, is that the central problem with these films, and I think you basically said it, is that they do nothing more than regurgitate the tropes of the film, of the bad films that they're supposed to be parodying. It's not a parody to just do the same exact thing every one of these sad slasher films does, and to have a goofier monster. That's not a parody, right? A parody is smarter than the work it's a parody of. A satire has more to say than the films it's satirizing. And this movie doesn't. This movie does absolutely nothing to in any way comment on, elevate, pervert, subvert, change,
No, absolutely.
dissemble, reassemble, dismiss, whatever. It does absolutely nothing. It just is one of these dumb films. And what's worse is it's actually worse than your average, I would say, from the few I've seen, B slasher flick, because it thinks its ironic detachment is an excuse not to ever be scary. So it's never scary and it's never funny. So what the fuck so it's just grating and obnoxious is what it ends up being.
This movie actually made me wish that I was watching zombie strippers again. That's how bad it was, because at least Zombie Strippers was funny. And at least Zombie Strippers had the presence of someone of the caliber of Robert Englund. You know, the original Freddy Krueger was a featured actor in that movie, and a certain level of credibility and humor to that movie that this, no matter how hard Zombeavers tried, no matter how many sight gags, no matter how many visual puns, and we'll get into those later, but no matter what they tried to do, this movie could not rescue itself from its own insufferable stupidity.
It couldn't. AJ, I want to get you in here. You had to watch it too.
Yeah, it was really dumb.
It wasn't it?
It was really I think the most insufferable part for me was that it, like you said, it thought of itself as a parody, but there was literally nothing that happened that was unexpected. So you knew what was going to happen, but in some occurrences, it okay, sometimes something would happen that was unexpected, but that was just because it was dumber than you thought it would be.
Yep.
Yeah.
This movie would have been improved by anything, literally anything. If you had inserted if you had cut it off after the first 30 seconds, it would have been majorly improved. But if you'd inserted
I would agree.
A 5-minute shot of just the outside of the house, it would have been an immensely better movie. Just in the middle of the movie, just and
it could have been a still frame.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been better. In fact,
it could easily have been a still frame with no music.
It would have been a much better
hit
movie.
The pause button from time to time while watching the movie, and you'll actually enjoy it.
I actually agree with you 100%. Both of you 100%. In fact, I distinctly remember one moment in the film where I was floored, excuse me, because they had a long, not long, it was actually a relatively short shot, but they had a shot that was just an overhead shot of the river, and it was lined with trees, and it was almost pretty for a moment. And I was like, I just wish that moment had gone on. If I had to sit there for 80 minutes, I wish I could have spent an hour just
Yeah.
that one shot of the tree. I was like, oh, that's kind of a
Oh.
pretty shot. And I think it was captured
That opening
either.
sequence.
If I'm going to be generous, I think that scene that shot was captured accidentally. But what I actually think it is, I think it was a stock footage establishing shot that they bought.
Yep.
That's the only way I can explain why the cinematography in that one moment was way better than anything else in the film. The rest of the film is shot like, to say that it's shot like a soap opera would be an insult to Days of Our Lives.
That's good.
It's bad.
I like that.
It's bad. In fact,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
speaking of soap opera level quality, the acting in this film is fucking atrocious.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
I swear to fucking God, there's a couple of the characters have are attempting, I think, to do Southern accents, but they pop in and out. They're totally like random when someone's going to suddenly break into this weird quasi Southern drawl. But on top of that, even if we give them, once again, give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, that they were attempting to do an accent, and these are young, largely unqualified, shitty actors and actresses, or actually the Southern accents were all the actresses. Maybe they just, maybe it's just
which struck me as weird on top of that, because if I'm not mistaken, the characters are all from the Midwest.
From Indiana! They're from the Midwest! It doesn't fucking make sense! None of them should have Southern accents. Let alone two of them having Southern accents in some shots. Why are they even making the effort? Does someone on the production crew think Indiana's like south of fucking Kentucky? I mean, that's the level of writing that's going on here. That's the level of production. I mean, sure, maybe that's what's fucking going on. I don't know.
But two of them have it, and one of them doesn't. So it's like maybe one of them just like really couldn't pull it off.
Maybe, or maybe one of them is supposed to be the city slicker or something. I don't fucking know. Maybe she's trying to do a Jersey accent and she just can't do it at all. I don't know. Who can say what horrors were actually in the script for this thing?
I greatly preferred the awful Eastern European accents by New Zealand actors that we had in the last movie.
Yeah.
Because those were fantastic and consistent.
Yeah, they were bad in an obvious campy way that was tied very directly to the subject matter.
And it made sense, yeah.
It did, and that's just it. But this it was just grating and awful and so distracting and such a pull you out of the scene. And honestly, thank goodness for that, because if I was trapped in the scene of this movie for an hour and 20 minutes, I probably would have followed the lead singer of Linkin Park into the afterlife.
One step closer to the edge, right? You're about to break.
I was about to break. I was about to break.
So, you know what, guys? Fuck it. Let's
Linkin Park fans who happen to come across this, by the way, but I'm not actually sorry.
No. I mean, listen, whatever. I mean, I'm going to say something. I'm not a Linkin Park fan, but I would rather listen to their entire discography back to back than watch 20 minutes of this film again.
And once again, a shout out to Sarah for not being part of this podcast. That
I wish she was
to make.
It would be great if Sarah were here, because maybe she could explain to us why she picked this film.
Other
than
knowing that she's vomiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that joke is too easy. Yep. It's like, this film made me want to throw up. But honestly, this film didn't make me want to throw up, because then I would have felt something while I was watching it. If this film made me nauseous, Made you what?
It made me want to take a nap,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, exactly. If that. I don't know that I could have even fallen asleep during this film because it was just grating. It would have been like um
This
trying to
film,
fall. Yeah.
this film made me want to turn it off. Is what happened.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. It was a struggle to not just pick up my phone and start scrolling through Facebook
Yeah.
or scrolling through Instagram and just relaxing like I normally do with some background noise that I'm paying absolutely no attention to on.
Have you ever tried to fall asleep while like a couple of drunks were fighting in the street outside your apartment?
Oh, all the time.
That's what this movie is like. It's like the
Yeah,
experience of just wanting to be unconscious, but there's a few obnoxious people who are talking just frequently enough and at just high enough a volume to make it impossible for you to zonk out, impossible for you to totally disconnect, which is what I would have loved to do. I would have loved to just.
I will say that there's one good part of this film at the very beginning, which is like the only good part of this film is the theme song and the animations that go along with it.
Yeah, there is. There's a
yeah,
nifty
yeah.
little and as you said, there's a nifty little opening during the opening credits. They have a nifty little animated sequence with zombie beavers that plays over the the actual real life background of the river or whatever, and that was good. I mean, it had almost a kind of retro
Yeah.
'80s sort of like silly '80s horror movie kind of feel.
And the cheap silhouette flash animation was actually more believable than the special effects used in the rest of the movie.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, that's another thing. Let's talk about the special effects because one thing we mentioned.
It was the wrong kind of special for one.
One thing we mentioned when we were talking about What We Do in the Shadows is how effective the movie was, even though it was a parody, even though it was a silly satire of vampire films, how effective it was at hiding the fact that it was a really low budget film when it came to its special effects. Like how they used the camera work and the mockumentary format to make up for the fact that they obviously had no money to spend on special effects.
And they did an outstanding job.
And they did. And this movie is the polar fucking opposite. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure because here's the thing. I can't tell to what degree the special effects were bad and cheap and to what degree they were intentionally bad. Like, were we supposed I think on some level we were always supposed to be aware that these were bad looking special effects.
Well,
But they weren't funny bad. They were just bad.
No, and that's just it. And it's one of those distracting things for me too, because in the very opening sequence, and I wouldn't call this a spoiler because this was literally the first five seconds of the movie. You have the two animal control officers or whatever the hell they are, because I don't think they ever actually effectively explain it.
They were like
waste guys talking,
medical or nuclear waste disposal guys.
See, that's how much I was able to actually pay attention to the movie. But if I'm not mistaken, one of them was stand-up comic Bill Burr.
Yeah.
Is that who that was?
That's who that was.
The red-haired guy, yeah. Who is actually a decent name in stand-up comedy and a funny guy.
And a pretty talented character actress too. Actor too.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that was all that they used him for.
Yeah. When he's certainly more talented than any other, although maybe that's all they could get him for was the first.
I was gonna say maybe that's all he was willing to do.
If it would have been 120 or an hour and 20 minutes of Bill Burr wandering around the woods making fun of what we saw in the actual movie.
Yeah, that would have been.
This would have been possibly one of my favorite things I've ever seen. One little change, that's all they would have had to do.
And as long as we're talking about how a small casting change could have substantially improved this movie. How bad an oversight is it, given everything else happening in this movie, and given this movie's obsession with its one joke premise? Uh, how bad is it that Smith, who is the hunter, who's this kind of hunter trapper outdoorsman character, who
Yes.
helps them deal with the zombie beaver threat. How fucking bad is it that he's not played by Jim Beaver? I mean, it's so obvious. In fact,
Yeah.
the actor that they have playing him is basically like an off-brand Jim Beaver. When I first saw him on screen, I was like, "Is that Jim Beaver?" Because if that's Jim Beaver, that's almost a funny joke. The character he's
Yeah.
playing is exactly the character that Jim Beaver plays in everything he's in, whether it's Supernatural or Deadwood or Justified. I mean, it was on every level a Jim Beaver character, and yet somehow nobody said, "Well, let's get Jim Beaver for this." And that's a case where he would have elevated this film by at least half a
To the
Vulture in my estimation.
Yeah.
What I hope happened is that they thought, let's write a role for Jim Beaver in this Beaver film, and wrote a role that was obviously a Jim Beaver role, and then presented it to his agent, and he read it and he said, "This is fucking dumb. I'll go nowhere near this." I like to imagine that's what happened, because I mean, I'm not wrong, right, Brandon?
Oh no, you're spot on with that. That would have been fantastic. And honestly, if they didn't at least try to do that, then I don't know what they were doing. I thought they were doing with their lives.
Right. Because he even has the Jim Beaver beard. He has some of the Jim Beaver mannerisms. He's a hunter trapper outdoorsman. Who's one of the more comedic characters in the. I mean, it's not rocket science.
And honestly,
it's
the
a
closest
joke.
thing to a relatable human being in the entire thing.
Yeah, exactly. Which is saying something, since he's a ridiculous caricature, but easily consider. And that, let's talk about the characters, because they are so. Listen,
You can't even call them one-dimensional.
Not even one-dimensional, but somehow they manage to be totally fucking unbearably obnoxious every time they open their mouths, and sometimes when they're not even opening their mouths. Now, you guys know very well, I'm not someone who insists that characters in the movies I watch be likable. In fact, I like a good, reprehensible human being in my movies. Now, it's kind of in a horror film. See, I feel like. Okay. I mean, you can do it one of two ways, right? One way you do it is you want the characters to be somewhat likable and relatable because you want us to be worried about them while a zombie beaver or whatever the fuck else is chasing them through the woods and threatening their lives, right? Because that's where the fear comes from. The fear comes from two things: our ability to relate to the characters and worry about them, and also our ability to see the characters as a proxy for ourselves, both of which are very hard to do if a character is completely unbearable. Now, the other way to look at it is, well, let's make these characters unlikable so that people will relish when some of them are inevitably murdered and chewed up by zombie beavers. And okay, but even if you're going to go that route, which arguably pretty much eliminates any chance that this could be a horror film, a scary horror film, but if you want to go that route and this is just a film about watching like obnoxious people get killed by beavers, unlikable people get killed by zombie beavers, you still have to make the characters interesting, because every moment where they're on the screen and not being killed by a zombie beaver, killed or maimed by a zombie beaver, is a moment that's unbearable for the audience. Like, you can't have a character who's both unlikable and not interesting. You can get away with a likable character that's not very interesting. Most movies do it all the fucking time, and that's the
Mhm.
cheapest, easiest thing to do. It's a lot
Yeah.
harder to do the other option, but I think often a lot more rewarding to have a character who's not likable but incredibly interesting, or at least rather interesting. But you can't have characters that are not likable at all and also not interesting at all, because then every moment is agony. You're like, Jesus, these people are vapid. They're they're just shrill, and they just go
And
drone on and on and
and
about
worse
their like.
than that, you couldn't even root for the Beavers because it was so batshit stupid.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like, not even the moments when they are getting like hurt and chased by the beers. You're not even relishing that.
No, because
No,
those moments are all shot terribly. Like there's no interesting camera work here at all.
And they're
well,
like
there's only so
idea
much
of
you can do.
tension is just a
Can
lot of
do.
noise, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. There's
yeah.
no tension. There's no
No,
tension in any of these scenes because you don't care about the characters first of all, and because the zombie beaver puppets or whatever the fuck they are so like not dynamic in the way they
there.
move and so
Yeah,
limited that like they never like they can't really behave in a way that's compelling.
there's only so much you can do when your movie monster is a bunch of cheap styrofoam props that you bought at Spirit Halloween last year when it went on clearance when they were closing the store down November 1st.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's it. And so, but also they're not funny. And I
No,
mean,
no,
they're not. There's nothing really that funny about. You would think that a zombie beaver might potentially be hilarious, but there's actually nothing funny about them. There's not. They're
no.
not funny. They're not scary. They're not particularly gross. They're not.
They're
They're not
they're a
particularly
little
interesting.
gross. They're not gross enough to make them interesting
Right.
by virtue of being gross.
There are one or two really gross scenes, and I don't
Yeah.
want to spoil them. And but I didn't
Since
wince
they're
during
literally
them. I
moving
didn't
your
laugh
main
during
heart.
them. None of them were even close to the one incredible jugular scene in What We Do in the Shadows, which made
Oh
me
yeah,
both wince
no,
and laugh. I just kind of gritted my teeth and just went on with it. Just I don't know. Uh, I don't know. Did Brandon, AJ? Did you have?
no. I'm actually going through my notes because I hated this enough that I had to take notes. That's how bad this was. I was afraid that I was actually going to miss some of the points that I wanted to run over with a steamroller. um, One of the classic tropes with B movies when they want to cover up the bad acting, when they want to cover up how cheesy the movie monster is, when they want to cover up how shitty the budget was, the go-to is to just throw a bunch of TNA at it.
I was gonna say, are you gonna say nudity? Because I bet you're gonna say
I'm
nudity.
gonna get there, and honestly, not enough tits in the world exist to save this steaming pile of bear shit.
Well, this was. I mean, not to make the pun, but this wasn't a particularly titillating movie either.
No,
There
no,
was
it really wasn't. It
there
really
were
wasn't.
not. I mean, not that that would have made the movie better if the sex was like better, but
No, but it would
but
have
it was.
clung to the trope.
But there were like every moment when the honestly, I don't know if the movie was. There were a few moments where I don't know if the movie was trying to be like sexy and titillating, or if it was trying to make fun of how stupid it is when horror movies try to
Right,
be sexy and
right.
titillating. But it didn't work either way. There
No, and Yeah, and honestly, I think even trying to give them enough credit to say that they were trying to be self-aware and trying to play with the trope and try to make it seem like, oh, hey, isn't it stupid when they do this? I honestly don't think that the makers of this movie, and I'm not even going to call it a film, are actually smart or clever enough to have thought of that. I honestly think that they were just aping the exact same shit that they've seen so many times since the 1960s. They've already done better, more extreme, more cleverly. And that's even giving too much credit to those movies.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, whatever they were trying to do, whether they were trying to, as you suggested, um, you know, throw some breaths at the film to solve some of its more glaring problems, or distract us with a few sex scenes, or whether they were trying to make fun of horror films that do that, it doesn't work. And I'm inclined to think it might have been the latter, just because I have to believe that the decision to make this Zombeavers as a, well, I mean, the fact that it's Zombeavers at all implies that this is a parody, right? And the unending torrent of like juvenile sex dialogue um makes me think that they were trying to do like, I, I don't know, like slasher film Van Wilder or something with this, which is horrendous. Which reminds me, let me just, you know
Which
what
would
I
actually
knew I
be a
was,
much better movie.
maybe. I mean, I don't know. My roommate in college made me sit through the first, or I think there are actually two Van Wilder films. Right? He
Yeah,
made me sit through the first one because he came to college thinking that that's what college was going to be, and it was what somehow it was one of his favorite films, and because at that point in time, I hadn't learned that the best defense mechanism is to be an asshole. I thought, oh well, I'm just gonna sit here and he wants me to watch this movie, so I'm gonna watch this movie. I mean, I'm very lucky he wasn't like, a sex offender or something, because I would have
oh
just
yeah,
been like,
yeah.
oh
No,
well,
you would have been in trouble.
oh well, he wants to play with
Yeah,
my penis. I'll just sit here and let him play.
yeah.
I mean, because that was the kind of, so anyway, I sat there and I watched that entire movie, and it was one of the worst movies I've seen prior to seeing this movie.
Oh no, no. I'm not saying that those movies aren't terrible. Not by any means, but there was at least it was at least a case where you knew that there was actually a staff of writers trying to make jokes. This one to me honestly made me think it was two guys smoking weed in a basement.
Right. Well, I actually at one point I was AJ. I was on call with AJ while we were watching this, and at one point I said, I really wonder how much of the dialogue in this film is improvised. And then I immediately said, no, I mean, if this dialogue was improvised, it'd
Yeah,
have to be
yeah,
better. It'd have to be more
yeah.
interesting
Oh
than this.
yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
yeah. Yeah, no,
But
it was absolutely atrocious.
let me tell you how I knew I was going to be in trouble. Prior to watching this film, prior to reading like a blurb about it on Wikipedia, immediately after Sarah mentioned that this is one of the films we might watch, I Googled it, and one of the first things that came up was the movie poster. Now the movie poster is as stupid as you'd expect. It's got a picture of a zombie beaver on it, and
Yeah.
it has the three lead female characters in bikinis, of course. But at the very top of the poster, it says, "From the guys that brought you American Pie, Cabin Fever, and The Ring."
Oh
And I said,
god.
"Fuck."
I thankfully I hadn't seen that poster, or I probably would have I would have taken a knee. I would have joined Colin Kaepernick and I would have taken a knee right there.
Just an act of protest.
Yeah, just as an act of protest.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's what we should have done. We should have
Wow.
done this. We should have done this podcast in complete silence while the national anthem played in the background. But anyway,
I mean, it
so
probably would have gotten some new listeners.
probably. But Jesus, so thing, I didn't know that there was any overlap. The possibility for a movie that combined like an obnoxious teenage sex comedy like American Pie with The Ring, which is one of my least favorite horror movies of all time. Not that I've seen many horror movies, but of all the horror movies that I've had to sit and endure, I found that to be one of the most insulting. And because no, we're not going to get into anyway. The idea that and Cabin Fever, I think my grandparents turned it on once while I was at their house, and I watched 2 minutes of it and walked out of the room. So that combination,
Oh, God.
I just knew I was in trouble, you know?
Yeah.
You know what? Why don't we do our reviews, and then we can talk more specifically about scenes? Although I think I've burned through everything that I really wanted. Yeah. Who wants to be the first one to give their review of the film? AJ, you haven't said anything.
I'll do it. Yeah. This movie was really dumb. Don't watch it. Sarah was dumb for picking it. Sarah's not allowed on the podcast anymore.
Exiled.
I mean, if you have any desire to watch this movie, go on YouTube and look at the opening scene and then close it, and that'll be everything you need out of it. It contributes nothing as a horror movie. It wasn't funny. Yeah, I'll give it 0.5 vultures for the theme song and the little animated beavers.
AJ, you are too generous.
I know, but I like the animated zombie beavers.
Now, is that 0.5 beavers out of 5 or 0.5 beavers out of 10?
Out of 10.
Okay. B-boy.
I'm gonna give this -3 vultures.
Oh shit. Yeah.
Yeah, it was that bad. It was honestly that bad.
It was pretty bad.
Whether it's the fact that the comedy wasn't effective, the fact that the special effects were just awful, the horrible acting, like you said, the dialogue that would have been better if these people would have just gotten high and been sent out to a fucking cabin somewhere. Yeah. And not even told that there were cameras there.
Right. It would be better if they didn't know they were being filmed.
Yeah. Honestly, I think this is a case where they probably would have been much better off just giving these people some mushrooms or some LSD and just throwing the puppets at them. For realistic reaction.
I would have enjoyed that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if a filmmaker could legally do that, but I'm just saying the result would be better than this.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm a big advocate of unequivocal freedom of speech, but I'm not sure a filmmaker should have been able to legally do this.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Is that your review, B-boy?
Yeah, that's until we can get into the really specific stuff, because there are some specific things that I want to tear apart. But yeah, -3.
Right. Well, so I'd like to be able to say that this movie would have been great as like a 1 minute 30-second trailer. Like, you know how they made those faux horror movie trailers to show between the two films in the Grindhouse double feature
Oh, yeah.
that Tarantino and Rodriguez did. I'd like to be able to say that this film would be perfect as a quick trailer shown between, Grindhouse films, a quick parody trailer shown, or maybe like a college humor sketch or something. I'd like to be able to say that, but I am going to be totally honest. I don't think that you could get 1 minute and 30 seconds worth of funny footage from this film. Oh Jesus, the alliteration
No.
is out in
Not even
full
close.
force. God. Oh,
2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks in a fucking row. Unbelievable. But I would really, I don't think that you could make an entertaining trailer out of this film. I don't think you could. Not out of the footage that's available in this film.
No.
That's how totally, like, this film doesn't even have a one joke premise. It has like a half joke premise. It approaches it's like a rough draft of a one joke film. The joke's almost there. You're going to come up with the joke eventually, but right now all you've got is Zombeavers, and so
It's Mad Libs.
it is.
It's Mad Libs.
It's Mad Libs. You're right. It is, and it's trash. It's fucking garbage. You know, I, as an amateur, like, film, I don't want to say buff, I hate the word buff, but as someone who likes films and enjoys films but isn't a paid critic, I always think it's like really deeply insulting when a critic does one of those reviews where they're like, I walked out of this movie. It's like, really, man? I'm being this is your job. You're being paid to do this, and you walked out because it was a bad movie. If I have a bad day at work and I walk the fuck out, I'm not gonna, they're not gonna let me back in again. That's not the. You sit there and you maybe you don't grin and bear it, but you bear it. And you write a review and you savage it in the review. But I swear to God, if this movie was not playing on my television in my living room, and if I didn't have a one bedroom apartment, if there was some place I could have walked out to, I would have walked out on this movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So my point is 0 out of 5 vultures. I said when I reviewed Kite, which I thought was a really boring, stupid sort of film, I gave it half a vulture because I said I wanted to reserve a 0 vulture rating for a film that is just so unbearably bad that I wanted to have that in my toolkit to use at a later date, and you know what? That later date is here. This is I can't imagine a movie worse than this. I can't imagine a movie more unpleasant to watch than this. I can't imagine a movie that managed to push so many of my buttons without ever once doing it in an interesting or compelling way. A movie that managed to keep me annoyed without ever making me offended, which would have been a good thing. I don't know. It's just fucking bad, man. It's bad. It's a bad movie. Yeah. So, okay, we're moving on to spoilers now.
Yeah.
Normally I say now would be a great time to pause the film, to pause the
Don't
podcast
do it.
and go watch the film. Just don't close the window. Don't close the window, guys. Just pause it, come back, watch it. No, don't. Just listen to us. Don't do it.
Don't.
Oh wow, they hate this movie. I'm gonna watch it because it's gonna be fun. This is
Don't
such a
watch
bad.
it.
I feel like
No,
watching a really bad movie, and this is gonna be that bad movie. I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna go to Netflix right now and watch it, and this is gonna be hilarious. It sounds so great, so bad it's good. Right now, don't do it. Don't do it.
No, for anyone out there who even after that still thinks it'll be fun to go and watch it, might I recommend to you some alternatives that are very similar experiences. For those of you with access to a meat grinder or a garbage disposal, if you think it's going to be fun to watch Zombeavers, what I want you to do is I want you to take the meat grinder out and attach it to your table, or just take everything out of the sink around the garbage disposal and just shove your hand down there. Because honestly, at least at the end of that, you will have had an experience that has changed you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Disclaimer moment: do not actually do that.
Yeah, don't do it. I mean,
unless you want
don't
to.
Actually,
like,
no. Even then, don't.
Don't do it and sue us. Okay, that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
Do it if you want to do it, but if you do it, don't do it and sue us
of
afterwards.
your own accord, and it was your own.
If you're going, if you're going to do it, what I want you to do before you do that is close out of this window, delete your browser history, and then go ahead and have a field day. We can't stop you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're so hell bent on doing it, go ahead. But it wasn't our idea.
So spoilers now. What?
Oh.
B-Boy, is there anything you wanted to? Oh,
Yeah,
Mr.
one of my
this
favorite.
This cat has been screaming through the whole podcast, and if I cared more about this movie, I would have made an attempt to make him be quiet. But Mr. Bones, what do you want? Anyway, go B-Boy.
No,
what?
Honestly, I mean, the cat is more relatable than the people in the movie, which actually brings me to another point. Probably the only good moment in this movie outside of that opening shot that was really just that great scenery shot of the drum of toxic waste floating down the river with the little flash animated beaver zombies. Decent scene, and it was sadly, and this is just absolutely atrocious that I'm even saying it, a real moment that they have during the closing credits where they show the dog in the water being chased by these beaver puppets, turns around because the effects were so bad, wasn't even afraid of these beaver puppets that were twice its size.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That was pretty good.
Which brings me to a connecting point. Dare they kill the dog, the only likable character in the movie?
Yeah, that was it. But as soon as I couldn't get attached to that dog, because as soon as I saw it in the back seat, I'm like, that dog's fucking dead. That the only reason that dog is in the movie is to be killed, which is another way of knowing it's like you can tell that it's going to be a bad horror film if they show a pet, because all they're going to do is they know on some level that animal. The characters we've written are so two-dimensional, so vacant, so just obnoxious and deplorable that any other living thing will be a better point of entry for the audience than them. So they put an animal in there because they know that the audience is going to fear for that animal's safety, if not the safety of the characters, of the supposedly living, breathing human beings in the film. And so it's always like, if a horror film does that thing where they kill a pet or put a pet in harm's way, it always loses me, because it's like that is such that doesn't accomplish anything. It's just a cheap.
No,
it's the cheapest, easiest, emotionally manipulative trick in the book. And the sad thing is, this film didn't even pull that off.
Right?
No.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would have even considered that forgivable if the dog had come back as a zombie.
Yes, I was thinking that too. I was like, why?
Killed the guy that threw him off the raft.
Right.
Yeah.
Had that one cathartic moment so that you could actually root for something in this pile of shit.
Why didn't the dog? I mean, that is such an obvious thing that even any other dumb horror movie would have realized. Like, okay, we like bring the dog back as a Zombeaver dog. Come on, like, why was the dog?
Also, it's like
And for
it's
those of you,
inconsistent in the like logic of the movie as
exactly,
well.
because everything else.
yeah, for those
yes.
Yeah.
for those of you sitting at home, if the phrase "Zombeaver dog" sounds stupid, how about werebeavers?
Yeah.
How about zombie werebeavers? Because that happens.
Yep. People who are half human, half zombie beaver. And that was stupid,
And
but I will give the movie credit
yeah,
because that was at least a little bit surprising. Not hugely surprising,
I
but
wasn't expecting.
It wasn't though. I completely expected that. I think I actually made a comment about it. I was like, why aren't they turning into zombie beavers?
oh. Yeah, I mean,
On a related note, what the fuck was going on with that tail thumping thing that the blonde chick was doing, where it just looked like she was really lazily twerking?
I
That dragged on for cut shot after cut shot after cut shot after cut shot.
yeah.
That's there for
That
those
honestly,
like
I think they only filmed once.
it's fan service for the beaver audience.
I will say though that the Zombeaver makeup was
It was decent.
pretty
It
spectacular.
wasn't bad.
I mean,
And if that
in
would have
achieving
been,
that like weird place between being like like
Like it was bad, but
both
like
gross and silly,
bad.
and being on that like it was inventive in a kind of B movie inventive way,
yeah,
and that was about. And if more of the movie had it, so here's the thing: the first hour of this movie is tedious and completely fucking unbearable.
yeah,
The last with squeezed within the last 20 minutes are a couple of legitimately inventive, silly moments. But by the time you get there, by the time you have the human zombievers running around, and by the time you have the fucking zombie bear, you are so totally just fatigued that you can't appreciate it.
yeah. And I gotta add this after you mentioned that. The Zombear. Badass. But it was only on screen for literally half a second.
Yeah, and it didn't do anything.
And all it did was roar. It roared once, and it was so obvious that it was just a digitally darkened version of the first time that you see the bear earlier in the movie, where the bear is standing up and roaring. All that they did was they put a couple of Facebook filters on it.
They did.
They made the eyes glow blue. That was all that they did. And I'm pretty sure all that was stock footage of a bear out in the woods, because for goddamn sure they did not actually hire a professional bear wrangler to bring a live grizzly to the set of this god-awful, abysmal production.
So what you're saying is they only paid for one fucking 30-second, not even 30-second, 6-second shot of bear stock footage. They didn't even bother to buy 2 30-second shots of bear stock footage.
Yeah.
And they just digitally altered it for the second go around. I would fucking believe
Facebook
that.
filter. Oh yeah. Yeah, actually, I'm pretty sure that Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook, any of these social media programs on your phones, I'm pretty sure any of these apps could have done the exact same thing for you.
Wow. So, AJ.
Yeah, and then at the very end, I feel it's worth mentioning the zombies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apparently the bees were eating the bear's corpse. which isn't how bees work.
Nope, not even close. Not even close.
But they needed to get in that zombies joke.
Zombies. Ugh.
So
Yeah.
like,
yeah.
okay,
Well,
I love puns. I really like puns,
so do I.
and that
so do I.
hurt. That hurt. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm Will, and I'm like, oh, that hurt at a pun, which is a
Yeah,
terrible place to be. I hate feeling like Will.
Well,
yeah, no, it's a moment where you're just dead inside.
yeah.
Exactly.
It really is. It's that dead inside moment. But what bothered me about that more, cheap, lazy pun, because I mean, you're not even changing a syllable to make the pun. Doing nothing. You're making a portmanteau, and really, I mean, that was the shart at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
That was the shart at the end of this movie. But what bothered me even more than that is the fact that they've placed that on at the end like they were trying to hint at a sequel. This is not the kind of movie that results in the creation of a Zombeavers cinematic universe. No, fuck you.
Honestly, man, I don't know.
I'm not making a franchise out of this. Fuck you.
Yeah. I do want to go
And
back.
I'm noticing an echo here, so I'm hoping that fuck you just continues to echo into eternity and will eventually reach the people that did this to us. I'm including you in that list for making us watch this, because otherwise I don't think any of the three of us would have.
Yeah. Well, she's going to have to endure this. I'm going to give her the link as soon as we're done recording.
Oh.
But I want to talk about the bloopers again, just briefly, because it's one thing. Oh, I am hearing a serious echo here.
I'm not.
Test. Let me see. It seems to be okay. Whatever.
Yeah, that will seem good now.
It seems okay now. Wait. What? Okay. Whatever. Talking about the blooper reel. It's one thing to include a blooper reel on like the DVD extras, you know, to shoehorn it into the Blu-ray somewhere. I mean, that's nothing against your movie, but if you're watching a movie and they put you know what? This is what I wish. I wish that if your movie was going to include the blooper reel as part of the film, as part of the cinematic cut of the film, you would put it at the very beginning of the movie. Because then I would know to walk out. Because I have never seen a good movie that thought it was that decided to include the blooper reel as part of the actual final complete cut of the film itself. If it's like that's like Rush Hour shit. It's like you had to endure 2 interminable fucking endless hours of this movie. Don't worry, we're going to show you 30 seconds of Jackie Chan screwing around at the end of the movie, you know? And this is what this is. It's like they include the blooper reel whenever they include a blooper reel with a film. It's a tacit admission that the footage they threw away was better than the footage they kept.
Yep.
Like the bloopers weren't funny.
But they were better than anything else in the movie.
Yeah.
No, but the dog one was cute.
Yeah, I mean, they were bad bloopers. Most of them were just like spit takes, basically, of people breaking, which are the most obnoxious, pointless kind of blooper. Like, oh, I can't even say my line. You know, but whatever.
Yeah.
But it was still, the characters seemed more human in those moments than at any point in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, again, goes back to that point that you made earlier of if they would have been allowed to just improvise their lines, this whole thing would have actually felt like they were people.
Yeah. But would have felt more like they were
not
people
just
anyway.
Manufactured shitty jokes.
Right. If they even...
And, like, there's another issue with the fact that they don't seem like people, and that's that they don't seem enough like not people for it to be interesting at all. Like it never like gets close to any sort of uncanny valley type shit. It's just boring, stupid, and over manufactured.
Yeah, I think I would have even preferred. Okay, that echo is definitely getting there. I think I definitely would have preferred
Just a
that
second.
they.
AJ, do you have your headset on?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Well,
Uh,
I don't know. I guess we're just gonna have to live with it at this point. I don't.
Yeah.
do you hear it now?
But
Yeah.
Hmm.
Let's just try to
yeah.
again. Well,
I think I would have honestly preferred if the characters would have just been exaggerated, blown out caricatures where there was no sense that they were trying to actually make them seem relatable. Like if they would have been, I honestly would have preferred it if they were actually like looking at the camera and grinning.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if they'd done anything interesting or
Like if
other
the
than
audience was actually there at the fourth wall.
yeah.
Like I feel like that would have been a better movie.
Couldn't have been a worse movie.
No, that's impossible.
Um. Anything else here, AJ, Brandon?
I have actually checked off everything that I have on my list of notes.
AJ, is there anything that you wanted to mention that you didn't get a chance to mention?
I'm ready to stop talking about this movie.
You're ready to stop talking about it. Um. Normally, the last thing we would do would be to talk about the ending of the film. Um. One wonderful thing about the ending of this film is that all of the characters are dead by the time it ends.
Yeah, and deservedly so.
Actually, one of the better things about the film is I don't know if you could really call it a brick joke, but certainly the callback to the beginning of the film that happens at the very end of the film, where the last girl, the last surviving character, is run over by the same truck that has Bill Burr and the other sanitation worker or whatever in it, that dropped the barrel of toxic waste or whatever into the river. Normally, in another movie, I would think that was a pretty stupid joke and probably a pretty dissatisfying end to a pretty dissatisfying or unsatisfying end to the film. But it was easily the most inventive thing that these screenwriters tried to do. So I'll give it credit for that. It did it. At least they did something a little bit. I don't want to say clever. I don't want to use the word clever in relation to this film because it's really not clever. It's actually a very easy joke to make, but at least there was a joke there, and it was a slightly better joke than any of the pseudo jokes that preceded it.
Yeah. One thing that actually did surprise me was that the final girl alive was also the only one of the leading actresses that appeared topless in the movie, which is a huge subversion of the horror movie trope.
I was going to mention
usually, I mean, the first people that die in horror movies are usually in this order: the black person, which there wasn't one. Movie. This was one of the whitest things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Then followed by people that have sex, drugs, and sure enough, the blatantly whorish character who decided that sunbathing topless out in the woods was a good idea, last one of them alive.
Yeah, and actually that list that you gave was another thing that was basically lampshaded in Cabin in the Woods, to bring up Cabin in the Woods again. The idea that they're killed, generally they're killed in that order, right? That sexual promiscuity in a horror film is as good as putting the knife in your own back.
Oh
And
yeah.
I mean, I guess, and in some ways, I mean, if you wanted to, a common critique is that the reason they do that is that horror films are actually, in some weird way, a deeply conservative um, storytelling medium, or a
Yeah.
deeply conservative form of storytelling, and almost like going back to like primordial time and folklore and fairy tales. It's like, you know, you tell your kid horror stories so they don't wander into the woods alone. It serves as a way of almost this kind of moral policing by
Yeah.
example or
Exactly.
by narrative. And so, like, these socially unacceptable or socially um, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, uh, um,
Degenerate.
well, I was looking for
Well, I mean, if you're going to the 70s and 80s, like the roots of these slasher films,
mhm.
that's what it was. It was the degenerate culture, and they were supposed to be moralizing. Like, this is what happens when you misbehave. The boogeyman will come and get you. He is real.
Right.
Out of line, and you're not a good kid, and you're not the virgin at the end of the movie. Your ass is grass.
Right, exactly. So it's interesting that the film, and also generally, a film like this would kill off the characters from most to least obnoxious. But instead, it almost seems to do the opposite,
Yeah.
where the female character who you think is the closest thing to a protagonist
Hmm.
becomes a zombie beaver relatively early.
Yeah. Yeah.
And her friend her, and then her friend who would be like the second, like, kind of the supporting character, right? The like, who would die normally near the end of the film, but
Mhm.
before her, she does die near the end of the film, but after after the person who we thought was supposed to be our kind of point of entry into the film. And the last person left alive, as you said, is the person who would normally die first. And
Oh
the
yeah. Yeah.
guys almost, it seems like the guys die in a pretty much just a random order.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I'm not sure if that was intentional. Um,
I'm not either.
Also, the men die before the women, for the most part, which is kind of somewhat unusual in these sorts of films.
Well, yeah, usually they try to keep one protector alive,
Yeah,
and that's
usually
kind
it's
of
one guy, one girl by
how
the
they
end of the
try to
film.
script it. Yeah, and I actually did appreciate, and I really hate saying that I appreciated anything in this, but I actually appreciated that the one guy that was trying to be out of the three lead, the one guy that was trying to be heroic, has a fucking tree dropped on him.
It's just boom. Yeah.
We didn't
That
even talk
I
about.
was actually okay with that.
What was that, HA?
We didn't even talk about the stupid, like cheating teenage drama subplot that they
Oh
kept
God.
going
Oh
back
yeah,
to.
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
The
that
thing is,
was.
like, peppered by these moments where they discuss this. It's just
it was like they cut scenes from Dawson's Creek into something that is actually worse than Dawson's Creek.
Right. Well, what I would, it's almost like if they took the script, a rough draft from a script of Dawson's Creek, and recorded the Dawson's Creek actors reading that script for the first time to
Yeah, yeah,
practice, and just cut those
yeah,
into the film. Not even like, don't even take the time to like
yeah,
work on their dramatic script readings or anything to get it polished so that they can have like the fake tears, or just like dryly reading, "Oh, Dawson, how could you? Why would you cheat on me?"
yeah.
Just totally, just fucking dry. Just, and insert and into
those actors because they were too bad to be on Dawson's Creek.
yeah, and they ended up on Zombeavers. Exactly.
Yeah,
This is what
yeah,
it's just everything about it. And so, since everything else about the movie is so bad, the fact that it makes weird choices, like in another better film, I'd be inclined to say that the order in which the characters die is an intentional
hmm
subversion of the horror formula. And I can't say that about this film. Nothing about this
no,
film seems intentional.
no. It, like I
Or
said about the
purposeful.
very name of it, it's Mad Libs.
Yeah.
Every single thing just seems like they just toss something at a wall to see where it's stuck, and
The
then
only
that's what they went
difference
with.
the only difference of course is that Mad Libs are funny.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
And this movie wasn't. Oh,
no,
I do want, as long as we're talking about the end of the film, there is a sublimely stupid lounge song parody that plays over the
yeah,
credits that I
yes,
think must have taken more time to write than the entire screenplay for the film. Now, don't get me wrong. This
yeah,
isn't like some work of comic art. This isn't Warren Zevon here. It's not a brilliant comedic song. But it is
it's something.
better than it's better than anything else.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just bad.
To
But
me, that one little lounge song moment kind of harkened back to one of my favorite scenes in the remake of Dawn of the Dead, where everybody is in the elevator in the mall, and on comes this lounge singer version of Disturbed's "Down with the Sickness," and it's just one of those things where it's jarring enough to take you out of the moment.
right,
In that movie, it was one of those kind of momentary reprieves of, okay, everything is going to shit all around us. And then, oh, here we are in this oddly peaceful little metal room with this really relaxed lounge song, except that the song is about something horrible. And that kind of, and I'm not going to compare the quality of this by any means. I'm not even saying that Dawn of the Dead's remake was a great movie.
it was a better movie than this.
It was. But for me, that lounge song in the end credits of this of Zombeavers, it was exactly what I needed. It
Yeah,
was something different to take me out of the moment that I had just spent the previous hour and 20 minutes suffering through in absolute agony.
yeah,
And it was a peaceful moment.
yeah. And why don't we end with a peaceful moment then? Brought to you by
Yeah, yeah.
just but wait, yeah. Well, that's it. We're done, right? We're done.
Yeah, we're
We're
done.
gonna
Oh, yeah, yeah, we're good.
Brandon, you're up next, and please pick something better than this. You don't need to pick a good movie. Just pick
Oh,
something better than this.
I'm gonna try to come up with something interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't know
I
what it's gonna be, but
yeah. I mean, you
it
have
should at least be something that we can find something positive in.
yeah. I mean, you are familiar with many more horror movies, I think, than certainly than I am, probably than AJ is. So it should be interesting to see what you pick.
And
Um,
hopefully you have more respect for us than Sarah, who chose this horrible movie.
and then
Yeah,
didn't attend the podcast.
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Sarah,
Like
if
she
you're
booked the
listening,
firing squad. She booked
Sarah,
the firing squad and then couldn't show up for her own execution.
yeah. Sarah, if you're listening, I sincerely hope that you feel better. As a friend, I hope you get over your stomach bug. As a person you forced to watch this movie, I hope you just keep coughing up blood until you die. All right.
Still a better special effect than anything in Zombeavers.
Okay, we're done. Fuck it.
We're done.
Fuck it.